welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So, I've known you for quite some time, Frank. I think the first time I met you was back in 2008.
Well done.
Through a mutual friend. And I did not know at that point that you are a musician, a poet, an author. All of that has unfolded subsequently since the time that I met you. So, what really interested me initially about you was that you were just retiring at the time, or coming up for retiral from your day job, because you worked in aviation.
I did.
Why don't you explain to me what that job was?
I was an air traffic systems engineer in the control tower in Edinburgh Airport. Very good job, excellent job, but it was just a job. It wasn't a career or anything like that. It was a means of manufacturing money, and so as I could actually do what I wanted to do outside of work, which is to look after my family and play music.
I had quite recently seen that movie Pushing Tin, so I had this romantic image of you, pulling your hair out and being quite like this kind of...
Air traffic controllers love that film.
Yeah,
it paints them in such a dynamic Wild West light.
I'll be John Cusack. You can be Billy Bob Thornton. So, is it anything like that in reality?
No. In fact, everyone who ever visits the control tower is always really impressed by the silence and the calm, and how the tone of voice used by controllers when they're talking to aircraft is always very, very level. And these people go through psychometric testing to get the right kind of personality. So you're not going to get Billy Bob Thornton getting through the actual assessments. Right. You're going to get people that are calm and level-headed and can solve problems on the hoof and make short-term decisions and things like that, and work within procedures. So,
do they have to set IQ tests or something like that?
There's a general series, more psychometric. I mean, you don't need a high level of education. You can get the job without a degree,
right?
But you have to have significant numeracy skills and communication skills.
I promise we will get onto the art later, but
it's no problem. I by the way, I wasn't actually an air traffic controller. I was a systems engineer,
yes,
which was one of the. It was my job to look after all the technology that was used by air traffic control.
Right. So, but you were working among these people.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And did you ever experience any sticky moments that you can talk about?
No. In fact, the thing about aviation is that the procedures have evolved over the years to a state where it's safety is the number one thing. It's the only industry I can think of where safety is the thing, and money's there, the profit is there, but it's not the driving force at all. And you get people like Ryanair operating. Ryanair, by the way, one of the safest airlines in the world, and because they operate under the procedures that guarantee safety, so there's no sticky. I did once see an airplane land upside down, which is very sad. But that was about 40 years ago, 30 years ago.
Were there fatalities in that?
No, there wasn't actually. It was it's a type of landing that an airplane does where when it touches the ground it just flips over, but nobody was hurt, nobody was seriously hurt, but it was a very odd thing to see.
You can say that again.
I've never seen anything like that.
Right. Hi.
Again, no,
that's astonishing.
And that's 40 years working in the industry,
Yeah. So it's funny because people do fret about getting on a plane, or some people do.
Yes,
but there is no reason technically why you should be afraid.
Absolutely not. No.
Aye. So anyway, on to you and your creativity. You play the violin beautifully. I've heard you many times. And tell me how that began in your life.
I started playing at the age of 8. At that time, Glasgow Corporation, as it was, like all local councils, they have an opportunity to make opportunities for young people to play instruments. And so I played, my first teacher was a man called Michael Riddick. He was an amazing man. He was the leader of the Scottish BBC Radio Orchestra at the time, but he also found time to be a pathetic violin teacher around the schools in Glasgow. Unfortunately, he died when he was when I was 12, and I didn't actually have a regular teacher after that. But I did attend Glasgow schools, youth orchestras, which were summer camps.
Mm-hmm.
So I was exposed to orchestral playing at the age of 11 years old, and getting to know the repertoire at that age was a real education in itself. Towards the end of that time, when I was 18, we actually played under Simon Rattle once, which was quite an experience.
Mm-hmm.
After I went to England to do the apprenticeship for the job I was doing, I stopped playing for a couple of years, and then I came back and lived in Edinburgh, and I started playing in amateur orchestras and quartets and ceilidh bands and folk bands. I've also played in an Americana band playing Americana music.
Mm-hmm.
And I've also, I was playing for quite many years with a duo called Home, which we made 2 CDs. That was very satisfying. It was just electric guitar and violin or viola.
Yeah, it was great music.
Yep. Very satisfying to do. That was all our own music as well.
Right, and your partner in that was Stuart, wasn't he?
Stuart Veach, yeah, very talented guitarist.
Yeah. So I am going to ask you to play later on, but right. we'll explore, all your different artistic pursuits. Meantime, right. So recently, I attended a book launch, and you very generously invited me to design the cover for the Scrivener's Corby. So I'm going to hold it up to the camera, and I'll put that on screen as well. So I painted this crow here for the cover of the book. Fantastic book, beautifully written.
Thank you.
This is your latest book. You've written 4 books, 4 novels in total, haven't you?
I have, yes, yeah. This is the 4th one. This is the second of 2 books that are set in the 16th century, around about the time of the Reformation. It's set in Scotland, England, and France, northern France, and it follows the life. First book follows the life of a family going up through the east coast of England and experiencing Henry VIII's destruction of the monasteries and things like that. Then this book is, they meet a street child, then they take on, adopt a street child in that book. That's called The Salt Farmer. But in this book, The Scrivener's Corby is what happens to that street child when he grows up and he becomes a lawyer, a low-level lawyer, a scrivener, and he gets involved in duels and experiences the plague in Bordeaux. He sets up a sort of low-level legal practice in Linlithgow, and he writes letters for people who are illiterate, and is a go-between between the ordinary people and the landlords and the authorities. He goes on to meet Mary Queen of Scots, and he attends the Battle of Langside, and finally he attends the North Berwick witch trials, where he defends a young French witch, which brings back a lot of memories from him for his life in Bordeaux. And
that's kind of where the novel takes off, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So Scottish history is obviously a source of inspiration for you. Right now we're both in Dunfermline, and there was prolific witch hunting in this area, in Dunfermline, but in wider Fife. Is the history your starting point? Is that what I'm trying to get into here? Is what's the spark of inspiration for you for something as complex as a novel?
Sure. I think it has to be character. Roddy Doyle, the author, said that people forget plots; they always remember character. So I tried to focus on character, and it works because when you're writing and you have a plan for the direction of the plot, sometimes you find that the character that has evolved out of your writing won't let you do that. It's suddenly out of character for that person to be expected to act in this particular way. So the characters drive as you are writing, and it's a dialogue you're constantly having as you're writing with the characters as to what's happening in the plot and how feasible it is for them to actually act out what you're writing and what's in the direction of the plot.
So as far as you're concerned, I think I understand that you're saying that the plot is really an apparatus to let the character unfold, right?
That's good.
And are your this might sound like an obvious question, but are the characters based upon people that you've met, or are you just imagining a character in your dreams at night, or how does that come to you?
That's a good question. I never ever intentionally take a character of someone I know or someone I've met. I think that's kind of a very rude thing to do, actually. I don't think it's right. People should do that.
It's vengeful.
Well, yes. The characters I have evolved, and I've got to know them, and Shelley, my wife, and myself are maybe walking on the beach, and I'm saying, well, what colour hair's he got? What kind of cars he drive? Or all these kind of things which don't appear in the books, but they're actually backstories which actually inform what my perception of that character is.
That's amazing. You're building it from the ground up.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's almost like, you know, when you hear about espionage, and you know, spies have to build up their backstory to get into the character. So that and of course actors as well do the same. So, and
that's absolutely right.
Yeah.
You're talking about the history. The history is something I'm interested in, and I've found it very satisfying to build these stories within the history. But you were talking about the history of around this area at this time in the 16th century. Massive, huge, complicated changes. Changes of people in authority changing names as their role changed, became regent this or lord whatever, and a lot of the characters had the same name, and all of these kind of things made the writing of it quite awkward, and I had to be very strict about maintaining one name per character as I was moving through the novel, and I managed to do that, but and nobody's picked me up on any inaccuracies in the terminology of the roles of the people that I've been writing about.
If you're creating anything that's set within a different period, it's remarkably complicated in terms of how much attention to detail you need.
Absolutely.
As you know, I'm a painter,
Yep.
and a few years ago I painted a large historical picture, and I made a series of blunders without knowing it. But fortunately, I had somebody to correct me and say the theme of it was the history of golf, and my friend told me, no, they didn't hold the golf club like that in those days. They didn't stand like that. They wouldn't have had golf bags. You know, it was just little details that leap out at somebody that actually knows what after.
I know this painting very well, and I said to you once, I reckon they're all looking for the ball.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think it's in the dog's mouth if you look at the painting. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. It's. I should run a competition. I've just given it away. Yeah, get it in the paper. Yeah. Aye. So, can
I say a wee bit about the cover? Do you mind?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
because
so I'll hold it up again just so that people can see.
This was the narrator in the book is a crow, a corby, and I was very keen for the image of the corby to be on the book, the cover of the book, and I had some ideas of my own, which I approached you, and we talked about it, and I had an idea about a crow with an open mouth just facing out towards the reader. But you, and I'm happy that you persuaded me that this construction was more appropriate. You've got the eye dead centre in the painting. The finish on it is fantastic. I now have this in my house, and it's painted on slate, and you can see the slate through the paintwork. The original size of the slate is what about 20 inches by 15, something like that.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's a large piece of work, and it's beautifully done. And at one, you can actually see there's a spider awaiting its demise in the bottom right-hand corner.
You can just see it on the cover of the book.
Yeah. But I'm really pleased you agreed to do that. I'm really pleased. I think it looks great.
Well, I'm glad that you were satisfied with the result. To be honest, you never know how a painting is going to turn out, and I suppose that's true of anything you create. And you need a bit of time to go away and then come back and see does it work. But when I saw it printed on the book cover, I thought that it worked well, and I was really relieved actually. To be is the right word.
I'm very happy with it.
Yeah. Aye. So that was a great privilege for me to be involved in that, and thank you for that, Frank. So I would like to ask you. I mean, you're multi-talented, right? And I'm not saying that to flatter you. I'm just for the benefit of people watching and listening to this podcast. And I just stick to the painting rule. I've tried a little bit of writing, and one thing I did discover, when I've tried a bit of creative writing, that how much like painting it is. You're really just using words to paint pictures inside somebody's mind. It's very imagistic. But I don't know about music. I've never been able to make music or conceive of it. So, I just like listening to it. Tell me what you see is the fundamental similarity or difference.
Okay, I think all of these activities have a platform, which is your skill set, which you've learned in learning about your craft, whether it's painting, being a musician, or writing. And that's a given, and that everyone's got their own experience of that, whether they've been to university or not, or whether.
Can I interrupt you there for just a moment for that? That should be a given. I don't think it is necessarily when it comes to contemporary art.
Understood, and I accept that. Yes, you're quite right. But it is a skill set of sorts in a different way, because people are bringing their life experience to it. Do you agree with that? Yeah, right, okay. The music side of things, again, it depends on which kind of genre you're talking about. In classical music, people are practicing every day, and they practice for hours and hours a day to get their technique right and to be able to play brand new music when it's put in front of them with minimal rehearsal. So that is the process in that particular corner of the musical world. In popular music, people are maybe playing more familiar repertoire that they're more familiar with, and perhaps less newer music, or if there is newer music, it takes longer to bring it to fruition. Jazz, being more improvisational, it's again less. I was going to say it's less preparation, but in fact, if you talk to people at the top of their game in jazz, they've done as much studying about theory and the technicalities of music as anyone in the classical world. But what they bring to the performance is what's in their head and improvise with that.
I mean, I think your skill set provide a platform for which your innovative capacities to come forward. Recently, I was tutoring my nephew because he was doing his Nat 5's exams, and he's doing art. So I was giving him a little bit extra help, showing him how to draw and things. Young people, of course, are full of ideas and imagination, but until they actually establish that broad base of skills, ideas are more or less useless, I think. And when you listen to a really good musician improvising, it feels, immediate and raw, and like they've just arrived into this medium, but they haven't at all. I mean, they've got a rich knowledge, and there's thousands of hours of practice involved in that.
I once heard a story about Stefan Grappelli, the jazz violinist, and someone has been analysed all his recordings, and they reckon he had 37 tricks that he used in different combinations and in different keys but those motifs were actually put in place in different recordings at different times, and I think that's a good skeleton to sort of think about how somebody's going to be. He's not deliberately doing it either. This is all totally intuitive, but there's a lot of that kind of. I'm conscious of it when I play. I'm terrified of repeating myself. I inevitably do, and will carry on repeating myself. But it's something I don't like to do.
I mean, musical expression, it sounds to me like it's you have a vocabulary. Stefan Grappelli's 37 tricks are his vocab. And it's the same in painting as well. And there is that risk of repeating yourself. But what it's like when you're learning to drive. It's so difficult, and you're thinking about every maneuver, and even once you've passed, you're still ultra cautious. But then there's a tipping point when it starts to flow, and then your subliminal knowledge starts to come forward, and you can express yourself in driving, and it's the same obviously with creativity.
I don't know how much this applies to the visual arts, but muscle memory is a huge thing for musicians. musicians can pick up an instrument and play something that they haven't played since they were a teenager, and the muscle memory will kick in and allow them to.
Sorry, what is muscle memory? In case anybody doesn't know.
Well, it's something that you're not thinking about, and I don't know exactly what it is in terms of, I can't describe it, but driving's a good example of it, because you don't, experienced drivers don't think about changing gear, using the clutch, steering, using indicators. You don't think about any of that.
If you learn to ride a bike when you're 10, 70 years later, you could still do it.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Aye.
So, yeah.
Well, I think I do spend quite a bit of time personally trying to think about how different artistic media operate, and that's why it's a treat to have you here, because you're engaged in these different media. But I think poetry is closer to like music than, say, painting and literature are. Because it has that rhythm. But even a painting has rhythm. And most people who are not educated in terms of the process of painting, for example, don't know that the composition of the painting, it's like a movie. There's nothing in a movie that's not meant to be there. Give or take, everything has been placed there by a set designer, and the directors approved it, and all that kind of stuff. So everything has meaning in it, and of course, rhythm is the most prominent aspect of music, I suppose. But stories, writing, it's about telling stories, and whenever you hear writers interviewed, they always talk about, they need to tell a story. But I think there's a deeper question than that I would like you to answer, is that why do people need to tell stories?
Why? It's not a very satisfactory answer, but I suppose mountaineers climb mountains because they're there. People are driven to whatever artistic avenue they find themselves on. And there comes a time in any project where you can't do anything else, or not you can't, real life gets in the way, but there's a real feel that there's something worthwhile going on here, and the more you engage with it, the more satisfaction you get with moments in writing a book. You can have moments where you've written something down and you think, I've just written that, and it's so satisfying. Then hard work comes in, the editing and all that, but the actual writing the raw stuff down and engaging with these characters, all your imaginary friends that you've put into this book, or you've grown with in the book. It's a very satisfying dialogue, as I said earlier on in writing. Whether that is a satisfactory answer as for why people do it, I think there's a need or a desire. Once you're involved in a project, you think it's worthwhile and you carry on. You must have seen this in paintings. I know you're working on a very large piece at the moment. You're going back and forward with that. You're not going to finish that. You're not going to walk away from that. You're going to keep going with that, aren't you?
Well, there's definitely a need to bring something that wasn't there previously into reality, and that there is a deep compulsion to do that, and that's something that all artists, creative people feel. It's just the urge. It's an inexplicable urge, and you don't think about it. You just get on with it and do it until it's done.
Yeah.
But I think that there is something interesting about certain artworks or songs that are in our culture that we're so accustomed to. It's almost it's in the fabric of your being. And then you remember there was a time when that song did not exist along the human timeline.
Absolutely.
The song "Imagine" by John Lennon, didn't used to be there at one point.
Yep.
and there were people walking around who are still alive today who walked around at a time when that song did not exist, and they never knew it. And it's so it's. I often think, what is the purpose of art? What's it for? And I've contemplated deeply, because I think, why am I doing this? It's.
I try not to think about that really, because I wonder if that's maybe a distraction from actually just getting on with it. because once you start asking a question about what's it for and all, that involves other people and engagement with an audience, and all the questions about peripheral questions about success, about the what other people think of it, and these are all distractions. When you're actually involved in it, you shouldn't be distracted by what other people are going to be thinking. Unless you're writing for the marketplace, and I totally respect that as a motivation and everything, but it's certainly not what I'm doing.
Yeah, well, I'm not writing for the marketplace either, as you know. We'll talk about that another day. Yeah. But I think what I was trying to get at is that it's a purification process. You're trying to purify your thoughts and your understanding about what it is that you're engaged in. And, you know, like Hemingway said, that he's trying to find a way to write the truest sentence. And I think, you know, it's art making, when you really think about it, it can be very instinctual, but a lot of the time it's a very meditative process. Yep. You know, you're doing this to the exclusion of all other activities, and it's not obvious that it's necessary at first until you see the importance of art within the culture.
You're right about it being meditative, but that's got to go hand in hand with technique, and you can't just you can't just make some thing without having a knowledge of the medium or learning something about it yourself. A lot of people will say, how do you write? How do you put a story together? My own approach is that I imagine a scenario. I want to put a scene in there that's based on a Shakespeare play. Okay, so how do I do that? How do I get characters in there? And how much of the Shakespeare do I want to throw away? How much I want to keep? And so I end up with this idea. And then I've got to think, well, how did those characters get to be in there? And what's going to happen to them afterwards? And then so it spreads out like a mind map. And these are all problems. They turn into problems which I have to find solutions for. And the solutions have to interact on a matrix, which becomes the book. And it becomes a linear narrative. So it's my approach is not to do, for instance, it's a picture or a series of pictures or a comic strip type thing and work from that, or even a straightforward time limit. I know people like Stephen King, he has his plot and he knows what happens all right from the start right to the finish. He just has to write it down.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, is that do you ever have the feeling, as I often do, is that the solution to the problem was pre-existing and you were just searching for it and you found it.
Right.
It was
platonic.
It was forged in your subconscious or some other dimension that you didn't immediately have access to. Which explains perhaps why ideas for books or movies or songs come to people in their dreams.
Yes. Well, a lot of people have commented on that. I don't particularly spread it myself, but it's interesting, and it goes back to the Greeks, that kind of idea. But I mean, certainly when I'm writing, most of the time I don't know what's going to happen next. I certainly, and all the books I've written, I've never known how they're going to be ending until well on in the process.
Right.
And even then, I maybe have come to a conclusion. I've got to rewrite bits that went before of it because they don't actually align well enough with the narratives that's there. But it's a constant iteration going back and forth in the book. So a timeline right from the start to the finish is not something I work with.
But none of that complex process would be possible without knowledge, without practice, and training. It's that platform that we talked about earlier about that it has to be that. Otherwise, you're just a frustrated artist, somebody who has an artistic vision or an impulse, but you've no means, you don't have the tools to express it. And I think that is something that I did allude to at the start of the conversation, that in contemporary art, because they don't teach traditional draftsmanship in art colleges anymore, it's people who are good at drawing and painting in school who go to art college, and then that development stops, but they've still got all the inspiration, and not many means to fulfill it.
Do you think certainly I can see this in music conservatoires, that they are very an aspect of what they're teaching young people is to do with how to make a living at what they're doing. Would you say that's also happening in art schools, that there's a more vocational aspect to these colleges?
I used to think that the art colleges were the opposite of trade schools, in the sense that they had thrown out the sort of draftsmanship skills, and because that was sort of not required anymore by the kind of illuminati of art theory and such like. But actually, I think art colleges do train you for the system that's there. It's just that the system that's there doesn't place any great value on traditional skills. So if you go on the internet, you will find amazingly talented people who are doing it on their own, but they're not in the mainstream. You know, the parameters of contemporary art are defined very carefully by theoreticians and theorists, and it's kind of a closed shop, and you know, of course there's a power structure with the gallery system, which is all connected with museums, but sitting to the side of that is the marketplace. And that's why it looks completely different from, you've got two different worlds there.
Absolutely.
And people talk about the art world as if it's all one thing, and actually they're completely different.
I think this comes around, in my perspective, comes around to what we started talking about is I started talking about my work, my profession before I retired. There's most people who are in any way creative aren't earning any money out of it. They're getting their income from a traditional source, a job, and they've managed to maintain an artistic activity all the way through their life, and with lumps and bumps and successes and failures, but they don't rely on it for income. And I think most artists are like that. I think they always have been like that. The idea of this 18th, 19th century idea of the artist as a hero, as a romantic individual who can go out and demand a living from patrons. I don't think that's really sustainable in the real world. I think most people, their experience is much more messy than that. Even the great names, Beethoven, Mozart, Redmar, all the greats in the canon, they've struggled to provide for their families, many of them. And so success in terms of being able to earn a living from what you're creating, what you're doing, I think that's a bit of a myth.
Well, it all depends how you define success. If making profit is your goal, then in some ways your path is clearer. I quite enjoy the intellectual challenge of making my artistic ambition and my commercial needs converge, so that both are satisfied. I don't like it when people talk about artists being one of a kind, and it's that they're. I come across all different personality types within the arts, and it's not it's not fair or even insightful to actually talk about the starving artist or the rich artist, or this. It's just, there are just so many different kinds of people.
A good friend of mine who's died now is an artist called Bob Smith, R.T.H. Smith. He was a pupil of William Gillies. Yeah. And I knew him very well, and he gave up on the commercial art market. He had many shows in the Scottish Gallery, for instance. So he was very successful, and he created a lot of work for corporate customers and things as well. But he just gets sick of it all, because he would have a conversation with the gallery and say, we need more of the red ones, Bob. They sell well. And he just got so sick of that. And he reckoned in his whole career, he probably only made enough money out of his paintings to buy one car, you know. So, and he developed a successful career as an education administrator, and he carried on painting in his own time. And I'm privileged to own some of his paintings in my house, you know. And but he was always a role model to me, not to get carried away with unrealistic expectations of the struggle of actually trying to make money out of writing or creating music.
I sometimes come across parents, or they'll reach out to me and say, "Oh, I've got a son or a daughter who, they've been to art college and they're still plugging away." And I remind them, I say, "You've got to remember that they're trying to solve a much more complicated puzzle. If you leave school and then get a trade and you get a job, and it's a relatively straightforward path, but to try and make a living in the arts is so you're trying to thread an incredibly fine needle."
Absolutely.
And therefore it takes longer, so you have to be patient with them. My own career didn't sort of unfold until I was in my 30s. It doesn't just happen with a big explosion. As soon as you come out of art college, and it's not that straightforward.
I was alluding to earlier on the vocational aspect of artistic education or music education in colleges and universities. And I actually think it is a good thing, because it teaches people about career planning if they are going to go into it and they're serious about it. How to actually, they have a means of learning about how to actually manage a career. And that certainly was definitely not the case when I was younger. I don't know if when you went to art college, you were told anything about how to actually...
No, they tell you nothing about that.
No.
Certainly when I was there, but that was a while ago.
Yeah. Well, I'll go further back, so...
Yeah. I saved myself a lot of pain, actually, when I stopped seeing art as at least like painting, as a commercial venture, right? I mean, there can be financial rewards for it, and you have ups and downs like any business, but I see it as a spiritual pursuit. It's a religious dedication that's required to get something meaningful out of it, and it brings me back to the question as to what do you think art is for? I'll tell you what I think it's for first, and see how you respond to that. I think it's that there's that old cliche, what's the meaning of life? But it's the wrong question. It's that what are the meanings of life? And the job of art is to find the meanings. Not the meaning of life is, you'll get a banal answer, love, family. It doesn't mean anything really. It doesn't tell you anything. But art actually, whereas language can describe an event, journalism can do that, or philosophy can describe an idea, but art steeps you in it. It immerses you in it, and then you have this appreciation for it that's much deeper and immersive. And that is what the arts are for. That just separating the wheat from the chaff, looking between things, and then going deeper and deeper and finding out. I wondered what you thought about that.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I think meaning and a lot of the vocabulary that people have to use to describe the activity they're engaged in is loaded. We're using words that 500 years ago had profoundly religious kind of spiritual or superstitious even ideas, and we're stuck with these words, the idea of a soul, or so there's not a lot of really objective scientific kind of language you can use about it. And I understand your point of view, but I don't share it because I don't have a spiritual outlook. What I do have is a very distinct feeling about communication with other people. And one of the other things I do is involved with the children's panel. I don't know if you know that.
I do.
Yeah, and so...
Sorry, just quickly explain
The children's panel is a lay tribunal. It only exists in Scotland, and it is made up of 3 people who make decisions on evidence and information that are given by social workers and education specialists about the future of a child, whether a child is safe where it is, and what interventions may or may not be necessary to actually achieve, alleviate the difficulties in that young person's life. So there's a lot of very intense kind of discussions that we have with families about the way forward. And that's probably, as I say, the most intense aspect of this communication between people that I've experienced. But certainly through music, it's very direct as well, because if you have a performance, people have a very direct response to music. It's in real time, there and then. Writing's a little bit less so, because there's a huge lag between when you finish something and whether you get any feedback from it or not. So writing's quite different, but the same motivation is there to communicate something. And it's, as I said earlier, about character, about human nature, and what makes people do the things they do, and why they make decisions. So the communication between individuals is my particular interest, I would say.
There's something fundamentally rewarding about communicating with another person, even if you're not in the room. And that's for me, that's one of the great things about being a painter, is that the picture. When I paint a picture, I like to think that this is designed to last 500 years, so it's still saying that thing. In my absence, and the beauty of say painting and music as compared with literature is that it's immediately accessible. You just either you get it or you don't. And it's I went to the Grayson Perry exhibition at the RSA, and I didn't really know what to expect. I've seen his work sporadically over the years. I wasn't overwhelmed by it, but the show at the RSA was just phenomenal. I mean, it was. I like big art, and this exhibition was outstanding. But the point is, it was immediately accessible, even if you don't understand the content of it. And I feel that I did, but a lot of people would have trouble decoding the images and some of the symbols and things like that. And you actually need to know how to read a painting, particularly a complex composition. But all the colours, the patterns, the finery of it, the huge tapestries. It's that artist has made this visceral experience for somebody who's walking in, and whack, you get it right away. You can't help but have an emotional response to it. Whereas literature, it's a bit more work, isn't it? Yeah. So
you mentioned poetry there. I think poetry can give you much more of a short-term exercise in that engagement with people. A poetry reading, I've attended and I've read at poetry readings where the reaction it can be silent, but you know there's a reaction when you've read something, you know.
In a sense, poetry is like a distillation of meaning from a you would spread that meaning out over the course of a novel, but a poem is a distillation. And it's in some ways more efficient. It always amuses me that people say, I don't get poetry. I said it's designed so that you get it. You just give it time, and there it is.
Someone asked me recently about the pace in my book, and they had to slow down to read it. And they says, can you say something about that? I said, well, in so many activities in normal life, people have to assimilate texts very quickly. When you're reading a newspaper, you scan the newspaper. You don't actually read it word for word. You're looking, scan down a column, and you're looking for a highlighted word, and if something catches your eye, you go and read that paragraph, and so you're bobbing and weaving, picking out pieces of text, and so you're not actually reading linearly. And we have this habit of assimilating text in this manner. And I think it's a good thing that people slow down, and poetry is the ideal medium for doing this. It makes you stop and think about this word, and then if you give it, the more time you give it, the more you get out of it. You get about the juxtaposition of words. Why has he had that sound at the end of the line when he's repeated it earlier in the poem, or you know, and you can link ideas. And
I think you need to be taught how to do that as well, to some extent. I mean, without education, you can still appreciate things, of course, but education helps you know how to pay closer attention and slow down and go back and look at it. I mentioned Ernest Hemingway earlier. Did you know that he developed his own writing style based on what he had seen in the paintings of Paul Cézanne?
I didn't know.
So Paul Cézanne really marked the transition from the old traditional ways of painting into the modern era, and he would generate dashes of colour across the canvas. So there was a sense of immediacy in the image that you looked at. And Hemingway wanted to mimic that immediacy, and he was well placed to do that, being a journalist, and he had been trained as a journalist to try to say what you're trying to say in as few words as possible, but not lose any meaning. And it's ironic that when you remove words, you can actually intensify the meaning, and that's what Cézanne did as well. It was he famously, I'll misquote this, but he said that he wanted to create something real and solid of nature, but by doing it in a more by painting quite abstractly and with less articulation. Right. See, when you paint, you can get lost in articulation, too much detail. That would be the equivalent to a meandering sentence with too many adjectives. You don't need to do that. You can just capture the what they call the value. The value is like a plane of color or a plane of tone or light or dark. You know, that's and writing is the same as that. I think.
Because Hemingway was known for very short sentences and no punctuation. And the punctuation thing I get, because that's extra black space in the page. But I would like to feel that a sentence has more of a mellifluous kind of, depending on the context, of course, but some sort of music in the sentence, and think of cadence and things like that. I wouldn't be. I don't think I would ever, unless I was doing it for a particular reason, I wouldn't choose to write in a journalistic sense or in that kind of minimal sense.
Well, you don't, but I'm going to make a rather inflated comparison here. I hope you're happy with. Okay. I find your writing very easy. It just slips into your brain when you're doing it. But I was reading Tolstoy recently, and he wrote. You might have heard of his novels. I don't know, but he wrote What Is Art. I remember picking this book up, and I was afraid of it when I was young, because I thought this is going to be too hard for me, and it was so easy to read, and yet there were very complex ideas being transmitted through the writing, and that's the same experience I have when I'm reading your book, which is really like you're right in the room, and you get the references and the complexity of the situation in the scene, but it's so easy to read. So I highly recommend your latest novel to everybody watching.
Thank you.
Good. So maybe it's time we could. Did you want to ask me something?
What was the Tolstoy novel that you were introduced to?
I've only just started reading it, but Anna Karenina.
Oh, yes.
I went to see, I think it was a musical in Edinburgh. Right. But, it's got such a long plot, and having to march through the plot, and it didn't make any sense to me that you would do that to a novel. Right. But the actors were great and everything, but it didn't transfer well onto the stage.
Right.
Aye.
Yeah. No, I'm a sucker for Russian literature. Yep.
There's a great book by what's his name, George. Anyway, he teaches creative writing. He's an American novelist. He'll come back to
I know what you're going to say.
A Swim in the Pond of the Rain.
Yes.
Amazing.
You recommended this book to me before.
Right.
Yes, right. And I got it. And it's not quite my cup of tea. I've read the first two sections. And just to say finish what you were going to say there,
Yeah.
it's about this American creative writing instructor who has taken 6 Russian short stories and analysed them. And to bear in mind, he does what a lot of American writers do, is that he's taken the original and he's explained what is in the original story. But you shouldn't need to do that. If you read the original story, it's all there. So he just seems to be repeating, like redundantly repeating.
It's redundant, right? Okay.
So that's my take on him. But it's worth, if it introduces people to Russian literature, I'm all for it.
Well, it certainly encouraged me to read more Russian writers, and one of the things I took out of it was the sort of masterful ability that Tolstoy has to create this holographic experience, where it's not written in the first person, but you do have the sense of seeing the scene from everyone's perspective. I thought, how on earth would you learn how to do that?
It's amazing. It's amazing. When I read War and Peace, like a lot of people, I had a piece of paper writing down all the characters, because not only are there hundreds of characters in it, they change their name depending who they're speaking to, with the use of the patronymics and such like. And so keeping track of all the characters in War and Peace is just a job in itself. But I think it's a really good way to start a book like that. And I don't think Anna Karenina is quite as bad as that, because it's focused on a family and a circle of acquaintances. Yeah. So
perhaps you could share some of your music with us today, Frank.
Okay,
would that be all right?
Certainly, yes.
Great.
Yes.
So you brought your beautiful violin. Before you play, Frank, could you tell us the story about your violin? Or is that the violin?
That is the violin, yes.
Yeah,
okay, so this is, it was a violin. I'll just get it into the camera shot. So, can you see? Yeah, this is a violin made in 1810. It was bought for me by my mum it was bought for me by my mum when I was about 11.
Yeah.
In a shop in Glasgow, and I played it as a teenager through youth orchestras. But then when I was playing in bands, it wasn't making a big enough sound, so I put steel strings on it to try and get a bigger sound out of it, and I actually ended up severely damaging the instrument to the effect that it became unplayable. But it was very interesting. On the back side, along here, the other side of the wood here, there's written the words George Thompson's Fiddle. And I'd known about that for a long time. So I hung on to the instrument, and I'd done a little bit of research about it. And I found that, to cut a long story short, George Thompson was a editor for Robert Burns and for Byron and for Walter Scott. He was also a music collector. He collected Scottish songs and tunes, and they sent them to be transcribed into parlour music by Beethoven and Weber and Haydn. I wasn't sure that this instrument was that was associated with George Thompson. That George Thompson. I mean, what are the chances of that? But I had it renovated about 2 years ago by David Rattray, who is a world-class violin maker and restorer, who was the Conservator of Instruments in the Royal Academy of Music in London. And he looked at it and he says, I think I know who made this instrument. So he found out that it was made by a man called William Ferguson, who was commissioned by George Thompson to make the violin for him. And George Thompson turned out to be a huge influence in Edinburgh cultural life. He was instrumental in bringing Paganini to Edinburgh to play. He was instrumental in the creation of the first Edinburgh Music Festival. His granddaughter married Charles Dickens. There's a huge amount of connections. So this instrument was his instrument, and I'm very lucky to have it, and I enjoy playing it, and I'm very pleased I've had it renovated, and it's actually in a playable state. For about nearly 50 years it was hanging on my wall just as a conversation piece, but playing it again is very, very satisfying. I mean, it wasn't played for 50 years, and the last person to play it was me when I was a teenager, so it's got a lot of personal resonance for me playing this instrument.
And what are you going to play for us? Okay,
I'm going to play a tune by Neil Gow called A Lament for the Death of His Second Wife. And this was a tune written, Neil Gow was an old man, about 75 when he wrote this. So I'll play that, and then I'm going to play a piece called Chief O'Neill's Favourite. Chief O'Neill was a Chicago chief of police who used to employ all the Irish fiddlers coming off the boat with the people coming out of Ireland in the diaspora. And when he died, one of the fiddlers wrote this tune for him. It uses gut strings, which are technical, made of animal gut,
All right.
but rather than steel, which is what the other instrument I have at home. That's got steel strings, so it's
Right, yeah.
completely different sound. The bow is a bow I had made to be contemporaneous with the violin. I made it on I got the maker to make it on a model of a bow that was made by a man called John Dodds, who was born in Stirling. And he used to go around London. He lived in poverty all his life, but he was a real innovator in the design of bows. You think of bows like a screwdriver, it's a huge amount of intuition goes into the design of a bow, the balance, the point of balance, the weight of it, the bounce of it, the springiness, the stick, all this kind of stuff. But John Dodd had never had any money, and whenever he would go to a tea room or if he goes to somebody's house, he would steal the forks and spoons, and so as he could make the little pieces of the bow, what they call the furniture of the bow, and that's how he got all the metalwork for his bow, by stealing people's cutlery.